I'm an educator, and today I'm going to talk about when students receive feedback and the 3 key learnings I've learned this academic year. Last year was my 10th batch of students. And this year, I noticed something I have only encountered twice in my teaching career. Not misunderstanding feedback, not confusion about expectations, but a stronger emotional resistance to feedback itself. Not silence, not hesitation, but moments where feedback feels contested, almost adversarial, as if correction is not part of learning, but a challenge to something more personal. This connects to earlier reflections I've had this year about classroom authority and emotional labor. Because authority in the classroom is no longer only about instruction, it is also about emotional positioning, how feedback is given, how it is received, and what kind of emotional space exists between teacher and student when learning becomes difficult. In many classrooms I've taught before, feedback was not always easy, but it was generally understood as part of learning. Students might disagree or take time to adjust, but there was still a shared assumption that feedback belonged inside the learning process. This year, in some moments, that assumption felt less stable. Feedback was still being given the same way, but it seemed to land differently, more personally, more defensively, more emotionally charged. And I started to wonder what might be happening underneath that reaction. One possibility I've been reflecting on is that feedback is not being processed academically. It may also be being processed emotionally and psychologically, especially in relation to identity. Because for many students, especially in high-pressure environments, they are not just completing tasks, they're building a sense of who they are as learners, who they are in comparison to others, who they believe they are becoming. And when feedback arrives, even when it is meant to be supportive, it can sometimes feel like it is touching that identity, not just the work, but the self attached to the work. From that perspective, resistance may not simply be defiance. It may sometimes be a form of protection, a way of holding onto a version of self that feels stable, or avoiding the fear that a mistake might redefine them too quickly. In that sense, what looks like disagreement may sometimes be fear expressed outwardly. Fear of being wrong, fear of falling behind, fear of losing a sense of competence they are still building. This does not change the importance of feedback, but it changes how I understand the emotional terrain it enters. And it connects deeply to something I have also been thinking about this year: authority and emotional labor. Because classroom authority is not only about clarity or consistency, it is also about what students feel they're risking when they engage with correction, and how safe it feels to remain in the learning process without feeling diminished by it. This creates a more complex kind of teaching experience because feedback is no longer just informational. It becomes relational, sometimes even identity related. And that adds a layer of emotional labor for the teacher, not only giving feedback, but noticing how it lands and holding space for reactions without escalating tension, while still maintaining standards. So instead of reacting immediately to resistance, I am learning to pause, to observe what kind of meaning the feedback might be carrying for the student, not just what it is meant to correct. From this year, I am taking away 3 key learnings. Number 1, feedback often intersects with student identity, not just performance. Sometimes feedback is not experienced as correction of work, but as a reflection on self, and that changes its emotional weight. Number 2, Resistance can sometimes be a form of emotional protection. What appears as pushback may, in some cases, be a way of protecting a fragile or developing sense of competence. Not always refusal to learn, but resistance to perceived threat. 3. Authority in the classroom is shaped by emotional safety, not just structure. Clear expectations matter, but so does how safe students feel when they are corrected. Because feedback is more likely to be received when it is not experienced as identity level threat. What I am taking from this year is not a loss of confidence in feedback. It is a deeper awareness of its emotional complexity, as well as its situation within the culture of learning in that particular institution. Because feedback still matters. It still shapes learning. It still guides growth. But it does not exist only in the space of instruction. It also exists in the space of identity, emotion, and trust. And I'm also learning in the acceptance of feedback as part of the learning process. That it is okay to make mistakes. That it is safe to make mistakes. And making mistakes is part of learning. Understanding this makes the work of teaching not simpler, but more humane. And I am trying to learn. I am trying, and I hope that I am able to do better next year.